My name is John. When I was a little boy, my parents took me to visit my grandmother. She lived in a little village in the countryside. Her cottage was very small, and there was only one bedroom. My grandmother slept in one bed, my parents slept in the other, and I had to sleep on some cushions on the floor. We stayed there for a few weeks, and I was troubled by terrible nightmares. Every night I would wake up screaming. My parents tried to calm me down and ask me what was wrong, but all I could tell them was that there was a man coming to get me. I can still remember the cause of my terror. Every night I would see a shadow figure emerge from behind the curtains in the corner of the room. He was pitch black, and all I could make out was his outline. He was tall and hairy, and I would watch in horror as he came crawling towards me with a sickening slowness. He came up to me and whispered something in my ear, and as I was just about to scream, he would place a finger against his lips and whisper, "Shush, shush, shush." He tortured me every night to the point where I dreaded going to sleep. As time went on, he began to appear not only at night, but also during the day. One evening, we were all watching TV in the living room, and at some point I happened to glance to my left. The curtain slowly drew back, and I saw the man standing there staring silently at me. But like normal, he raised his hand and put his finger to his lips and whispered, "Shush, shush, shush." I let out a horrific scream and immediately told my mother what I had seen. She got up and went over to the curtains, pulling them back and forth, showing me that there was nothing there. But of course by then he'd already disappeared. When the holiday was over, we went back to our apartment in the city, and the nightmare stopped. After that, my grandmother would always come to visit us instead, so we never went to her cottage on vacation again. As time went on, I stopped thinking about the man and eventually forgot about him altogether. But one summer when I was 13 years old and my little brother was 5, we went to stay with my grandmother again. My parents were in the kitchen having a cup of tea with her, and they asked me to get my little brother ready for bed. While I was preparing a mattress on the floor for both of us to sleep on, my little brother was sitting up on one of the beds, and I noticed that he was being unusually quiet. When I looked up, I saw that he was staring at something. "What's wrong?" I asked him. Then suddenly he jerked his head around and looked at me, his eyes wide with fear. "John," he said, pointing at the curtains, "the shush man is standing there." Needless to say, my brother and I spent the night sleeping in the kitchen, and we never went to visit my grandmother's cottage again. So about a month ago, my girlfriend and I got engaged. We moved into a new apartment and began living together. It was the first time either one of us had shared an apartment, so it was a new experience for both of us. We were deeply in love. I knew she was the one I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, and I thought she felt the same about me. Everything went well until about 2 weeks ago, when I noticed that my girlfriend was acting very strangely. She became so attached to me that it felt like she couldn't stand being away from me for a moment. One evening, she said to me, "Darling, when you're not home, I still feel you near me." I didn't attach much importance to these words. I thought she was just being affectionate. However, a few days later, she told me something else. "Whenever you're at work," she said, "I often hear your voice, as if you're calling my name." This began to happen more and more as the days went by, and I started to get a little worried about her. One day, when I arrived home from work, I found her sitting silently at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall, with a glazed look in her eyes. I grabbed a chair and sat down beside her and asked her what was the matter. "I think there's something wrong with me," she murmured. "Well, why do you think that?" I asked. "I saw you today," she said. "You walked from the kitchen into the bedroom, and then you stood back to me, staring out the window." "But I was at work all day," I said. "I know," she replied with a sigh. That's when I really began to worry. I suspected my girlfriend was losing her mind and starting to have hallucinations. Over the next few days, she kept telling me that she saw me in the apartment when I was at work. She could even describe exactly what I was wearing. My girlfriend was also acting more and more strange. She was getting more and more quiet, and she was terrified of being left alone. Sometimes she would just sit there silently staring at me. Last night, my girlfriend was very tired and decided to go to bed early. I held her hand and sat on the edge of the bed as she was falling asleep. But just before she nodded off, she said, "You're not here." "But, honey, I'm right here," I replied. "Don't worry, everything is fine." "No, you're not here," she said. "You're in the kitchen." Just then I heard a dull noise coming from the kitchen. It sounded like a chair scraping across linoleum. Then I heard the sound of footsteps walking down the hallway. Fear gripped my heart, and I didn't know what to do. All of a sudden, the handle to the bedroom door began to turn, and the door slowly began to open. Maybe it's just a draft, I thought, as my eyes grew wide with fear. But it wasn't. It wasn't a draft at all. The door swung open, and I saw a man standing there in the doorway. It was me. It was difficult to describe exactly what I saw, but it was me. But at the same time, it wasn't me. It was as if I was staring at myself in a mirror, but the other me had cold, lifeless eyes. The other me looked at me for a moment, then turned and left, shutting the door behind me. It took me a moment to recover from the shock, and then I sprang off the bed and I ran after him. The hallway was empty. I checked the kitchen, then I checked the bathroom, but he was nowhere to be found. The other me, he just simply vanished. It was terrifying. And then, as I stood in the hallway, trying to figure out what just happened, trying to calm myself down and convince myself that it was just a hallucination, I heard a faint voice coming from the kitchen. But it wasn't my voice. It was the voice of my girlfriend. "We are here to stay," she said, "forever." But I realized that my girlfriend wasn't in the kitchen. She was laying in the bedroom, exactly where I had just left her seconds before. I was so frightened that I started trembling like a leaf. I ran into the bedroom, grabbed my girlfriend, dragging her with me out the front door. We left the apartment that very moment and spent the night at my parents' house. Tomorrow, we will go back and pick up our things. I still can't understand what happened in that apartment, but neither of us can bear to spend another night there. Hopefully, when we pick up our things, all will be well, and there won't be anyone there. One day, a young married couple went hiking in the mountains. As the sun began to set, they realized that they were lost. The wife was getting worried, but her husband tried to calm her down and assure her that everything would eventually be all right and they would find their way back to their car. However, after walking for hours, they still had no idea where they were. It was growing dark and the man and wife were just getting desperate. They didn't have a map or a compass with them, and all the trees started to look the same. Just when they were about to give up hope, they came across an old cabin in a clearing. The cabin looked as if it had seen better days. It was dilapidated, and it seemed like it hadn't been used in a long, long time. Some of the windows were cracked and broken, and a lot of the tiles had fallen off the roof. The husband knocked on the front door, but there was no response. When he turned the handle, it slowly creaked open. Inside, they found that it was in a bad state of disrepair. There was very little furniture, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. As the couple cautiously looked around, they noticed a strange atmosphere and a peculiar musty smell. The walls were covered from floor to ceiling with graffiti, and written in red paint, the words "Death, Death, Death, Death" were repeated over and over again. The man and woman were unnerved. With a shaking hand, the husband reached out to touch the wall. He was horrified to find that the paint was not yet dry. The couple was very frightened, but they had nowhere else to go. They knew that the mountain was dangerous at night and there were a lot of wild animals prowling the woods. Despite the creepy writing on the walls, they decided to stay the night. Going upstairs, they found a moth-eaten mattress that was covered in stains. The husband and wife wrapped themselves in an old piece of carpet to keep warm and tried to make themselves as comfortable as possible under the circumstances. They lay down together on the mattress and eventually managed to fall asleep. Sometime after midnight, the couple were awakened by a strange rustling noise. It sounded like someone or something was moving around outside. "Did you hear that?" asked his wife. "I think there's somebody out there." Her husband listened for a while, but he didn't hear anything. So he got out of bed and walked over to the window. Of course, it was too dark outside to see anything, so opening the window, he stuck his head out. "Who's out there?" he called nervously. There was no answer. He was about to go back to bed when his wife said, "Maybe it's someone who can't speak." The husband returned the window. "Is there anybody out there? Clap once for yes and twice for no." He strained his ears to listen. The stars twinkled in the night sky, the crickets were chirping loudly, and all of a sudden he heard a loud clap. The man turned to his wife and said in surprise, "You were right. There's someone out there." He leaned out the window and his eyes scanned in the darkness. He couldn't make anything in the pitch black. "Are you the owner of this cabin?" he asked. Clap, clap. "Are you a man?" Clap, clap. "You're a woman then?" Clap, clap. "Are you human?" Clap, clap. A chill ran down his spine. He swallowed hard and croaked, "Did you come here alone?" Clap, clap. "Well, how many people are with you?" Clap once for each person. Clap, 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 clap. And the clapping went on and on. The man and woman looked at each other, got up, and ran out of the house as fast as they could. One night, a father and his daughter were driving down a deserted country road. They were returning home after spending the entire day visiting the girl's mother in hospital. Listening to the sound of the rain drumming on the car roof, the girl began to doze off. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. The father struggled with the steering wheel, but the car skidded off the wet road and slammed into a stone wall. After checking that his daughter was uninjured, the man got out of the car to survey the damage. Both of the front tires had been punctured, and the right fender was crumpled up against the wall. The rest of the car had survived unscathed. "We must have driven over something on the road," he explained to his daughter. "Whatever it was, it blew out both of the tires." "Well, you can fix it, right?" asked his daughter, somewhat shaken by the accident. "Well, no, not really," replied her father, shaking his head. "I've only got one spare tire in the trunk. I'll have to walk back into town and find someone to tow the car," he said. "It really isn't that far from here. You can wait in the car while I'm gone." "Well, okay," she said reluctantly, "but please don't take too long." The man could see in his daughter's eyes that she was frightened. "Sit tight," replied the father as he closed the car door. "I'll be back as soon as possible." His daughter watched him in the rearview mirror as he trudged off down the road in the pouring rain and disappeared into the night. More than an hour had passed, and her father still hadn't returned. The girl began to wonder what was taking him so long. She was very worried because he should have been back by now. Just then, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a figure in the distance walking towards the car. At first, she thought it was her father, but when she turned to take a closer look, she realized that it was a strange man. He was dressed in overalls and had a big bushy beard. He was carrying something large in his left hand, swinging it back and forth. Something about this man made her very, very nervous. As he approached, she stared out the back window and squinted her eyes. In the dim light, she could just make out what he was clutching in his right hand. It was a big, sharp butcher's knife. Thinking quickly, the terrified girl locked both doors in the front of the car, then jumped into the back seat and locked the rear doors. When she looked up again, she saw that the strange man had stopped in his tracks and seemed to be staring directly at her. Suddenly, the man raised his arm in the air, and the girl let out a blood-curdling scream. In his left hand, he was clutching her father's severed head. She just kept screaming and screaming. She couldn't stop herself. Her heart was pounding, and she was struggling to breathe. The grotesque expression on their father's face was horrifying to behold. His mouth was hanging open, and his eyes were rolled back in his head. When the man reached the car, he shoved his face right up against the window and glowered at her with his crazed, bloodshot eyes. His hair was wild and matted with dirt. His face was covered in deep scars. For a moment, he just stood there in the driving rain, grinning at her like a madman. Then, he reached into his pocket, took something out, and slowly lifted his hand. He was holding her father's car keys. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. If you'd like to, you can follow me at Twitter. The handle is @FuzzyPantaloons, and I'll see you all next time.